What is a Miller Trust and why do I need one? Hello, my name is Carla Levinson. I have been an elder law attorney for 17 years. I am also a mom and a caregiver for my mom and my grandmother. Today, I am speaking about a very specific topic. That is the topic of Miller Trusts. Miller Trusts are very specific, but they are also very important for long-term care Medicaid eligibility. And I also want to clarify that that is what we are talking about here. There are all different types of Medicaid. Today, we are talking about long-term care Medicaid eligibility. If you've watched some of my other videos, especially my videos about long-term care Medicaid, Miller Trusts are something that I refer to sometimes, but this video takes a deeper dive. I'm going to be talking today about what the Miller Trust is, how it works, and how it fits into becoming eligible for long-term care Medicaid. So the first question is, what is a Miller Trust? I will go into more detail later, but basically, if you are over the monthly Medicaid income limit in your state, you can set up a Miller Trust to get below the income limit. Also, the Miller Trust is state specific. A Miller Trust is something that is needed for long-term care Medicaid eligibility only in some states. So you first need to check and see if your state has a monthly income limit, and if it does, whether or not you can use a Miller Trust to get below this income limit. In Delaware, we do have a monthly income limit, and you can use a Miller Trust to get below it. I also want to point out that other states might call the Miller Trust something different. There are a handful of different names for it. Some people or some states might call it a QIT or a qualified income trust. Some people might call it an irrevocable income only trust. Some people might refer to it as a D4B trust, but all of these terms are referring to the same thing, which is an irrevocable trust. So if you set it up and you use it correctly, even though you might be over the gross monthly income limit for Medicaid purposes, you can still be eligible and receive Medicaid benefits. So who needs a Miller Trust? A person needs a Miller Trust only if three things exist. 1, the person must be applying for long-term care Medicaid. 2, the person must be receiving or getting ready to receive the kind of care that Medicaid in your state would cover. So that could be nursing home care, assisted living care, or in-home care, depending on your state. And 3, they must be over the gross monthly income limit. In Delaware, in 2025, the gross monthly income limit is $2,437.50. And this number changes every year. So that number is current for 2025. And I also want to point out that the monthly income limit is only one piece of your financial eligibility test for Medicaid. If you've watched some of my other videos or know something about Medicaid, you'll know that Medicaid eligibility is a 3-part test. So what we're talking about today with the Miller Trust only has to do with getting below the income limit for Medicaid. Does not have anything to do with getting below the asset limit or becoming medically eligible for Medicaid. So just remember, if you figure out that you do need to set up a Miller Trust to get below the income limit for Medicaid, you still have to be below the asset limit for Medicaid as well. Why is the Miller Trust so confusing? I have people calling my office all the time wanting to set up a Miller Trust, wanting to talk about a Miller Trust, and a lot of people don't really understand what it is, how it works, or why you need it. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of how the Miller Trust works, I want to take a minute to go over some of the common misconceptions about the Miller Trust. Some people think that setting up a Miller Trust will protect your assets from Medicaid accountability. It does not protect assets. If you want to protect assets from Medicaid accountability, there are other ways to do that, but the Miller Trust is not going to help you with that. All the Miller Trust will do, as I said before, is get you below the income limit for Medicaid purposes. Some people also think that anyone applying for long-term care Medicaid needs a Miller Trust. This is not the case. Again, you only need to set up a Miller Trust if you are over the gross monthly income limit for Medicaid eligibility. Other people also think that once you set up the Miller Trust with your attorney, that your Medicaid application will be automatically approved. This is not the case either. As I said before, you have to be below the income limit for Medicaid, but you also have to be below the asset limit, and you also have to make sure that you set up your Miller Trust and use it correctly, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So then what exactly is a Miller Trust? The best way to describe it is that it is a trust document that you set up with an attorney, but it also has a bank account, usually just a regular checking account that is linked to it. You have to deposit your income into your Miller Trust account every month. Medicaid law says that if you deposit the amount of income that you are above the monthly income limit into the Miller Trust for that month, then you will be below the income limit for Medicaid and you will be income eligible for that month. A couple things to note: when I am talking about income, I am talking about gross monthly income. That means it is your income before any deductions are taken out. I cannot stress this enough. You need to check your Social Security award letter and you need to check your pension statement or any other income statement to make sure that you are looking at your gross income amount and not your net amount. So if you just look at your checking account and you see what is coming in from Social Security, that is not your gross Social Security amount. The reason that is not your gross Social Security amount, it's because Social Security is taking out your Medicare premium amount before they deposit your Social Security into your account. So unless you look at your Social Security award letter, which states what your income is before your Medicare premiums are withdrawn, you might be looking at the wrong number and you might mistakenly think that you are below the income limit when actually you are above it. The same goes for pension income. Sometimes taxes are being withheld from that amount. So if you're just looking at what part of your pension is going into your checking account, again, that might not be the gross amount. Medicaid will want to see statements of your gross monthly income to see if you are above or below the income limit. So if you figure out that you are above the gross monthly income limit for Medicaid after you checked your gross income statements, then you will need to set up a Miller Trust. You can set up the Miller Trust document with an attorney, and the Miller Trust has to contain certain wording for Medicaid so that it's good and that it will work for your application. The major thing Medicaid looks for is wording that says that the trust is irrevocable, or in other words, that you can't change it. It also has to say that when you pass away, if there's money in the Miller Trust at that time, then that money has to be paid back to Medicaid. Sometimes that's called a payback provision. In the Miller Trust, you will have to name a trustee. Usually that is an adult child, a spouse, or another trusted person. The trustee is who is in charge of the Miller Trust. You can also name a backup trustee in case the first trustee is not available or can't do the job anymore. Once you set up and sign your Miller Trust document, typically you will take the document to the bank and open your Miller Trust checking account at the bank. This will be the account that you use for your Miller Trust. In Delaware, and again, this varies from state to state, the rule is that for whatever month you want Medicaid to cover your care, you need to deposit the amount that you are over the gross monthly income limit into your Miller Trust account, and you must do it by the end of that month. So, for example, if your gross monthly income is $2,500 and the Delaware gross monthly income limit for 2025 is $2,437.50. You have to deposit at least $62.50 into your Miller Trust account every month. If you don't deposit the correct amount into your Miller Trust, and if you don't do it within the correct time frame, then Medicaid may say that you are not eligible for Medicaid for that month, and they may not pay for your care for that month. So it is very important that you set up your Miller Trust correctly, and also very important that you follow the instructions of the attorney who set it up for you. Because if you don't set it up correctly, you run the risk of not getting Medicaid for the month you want it, which can, at least in Delaware, be equal to a $13,000 or $14,000 nursing home bill. What happens to the money in the Miller Trust? The general rule for Medicaid is that if you're in a nursing home and you are approved for long-term care Medicaid, you have to pay all of your income to the nursing home every month, minus your health insurance premiums and minus a monthly personal needs allowance of $75. So regardless of whether you have a Miller Trust or not, you will have to pay all of your income to the nursing home every month, minus those allowable deductions. This is a little bit of an oversimplification because if the Medicaid applicant is married, there are some different rules, and there are some circumstances where the non-Medicaid spouse is entitled to keep some of the income in the Miller Trust instead of having to pay it all to the nursing home. I'm not going to talk about that here, just for simplicity's sake. I also want to mention that in Delaware, if you are receiving home-based Medicaid services, you can keep all of your income to pay for your daily living expenses. The last thing I want to remind everyone about the Miller Trust is not to forget that there is still an asset eligibility test for Medicaid that you have to meet in order to qualify. So the Miller Trust is only helping with the income part of this equation. If you want some additional information about how the asset test works and how the Miller Trust would work in your specific situation, you need to contact a lawyer and get some specific advice. I hope this has helped give you some basic information about the Miller Trust. And remember, if you have specific questions, talk to an experienced elder law attorney in your state. Thanks for watching.